Ending Life Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Clacks Women for Indie podcast. This week we'll be dropping in again on the virtual coffee meetup, which has now become an established Friday morning tradition with the Clacks WFIs. I don't know, it's going to be very strange once lockdown finally does end, if we're ever all going to be in the same room again. It'll be weird. I've also been looking at how many different independent supporting podcasts and blogs and everything else there are. So this week I'm going to just list a few of the podcasts that I've come across and ones that I particularly enjoy. I'm sure there will be some you're aware of, but there might be some that you've not come across and want to go and try. And also it never does any harm to do a bit of publicity for fellow indie media. But first, talking of a bit of publicity, on the daytime show on Indie Live Radio, which goes out Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, they often have some fantastic guests. This week they had a double whammy of fantastic guests with Lesley Riddoch and Alan Smith, the MP for Stirling. Lesley is always a fantastically interesting guest and sometimes quite a feisty one, which is great. We love feisty women. And beforehand, we'd been given the opportunity to submit some questions. So Clacks WFI always have questions for Lesley. We're big fangirls. So we submitted one and got slapped down big style by Lesley, which was quite funny. And the second one was just a bit of shameless publicity seeking. But again, quite amusing, I think. So we shall share that with you and see what you think. Music this week, again, becoming my favourite Ross Bugden Olympus, the same one I used last week. And Ross Bugden creates royalty and copyright-free music, which you can find on YouTube if you subscribe to his channel. He's got a great selection there. Okay, on with the show.
A wee question here. It's from Fiona from Clackmannanshire Women for Independence. Fiona's asking is, should there be a limit on the number of times someone can get elected on the list when they've been rejected in the constituency vote? Thinking in
honestly, this is like, God, this drives me bloody mad. Let's put in a proper system of proportional representation. Everything we're doing in Scotland is trying to make the best of a bad job. Bad jobs that we're in charge of. So similarly, people get all het up about, problems of the numbers of councillors and so on, and or rather, they worry that there's kind of, they're paying 16,000 quid per councillor. The way that other countries are dealing with a lot of this is by having such small councils that actually the Norwegians don't pay their councillors because their councils are so small they can meet in the evening. They don't have to take time off work. We're sitting mitigating. It was like we came out of our mother's collective womb, mitigating absolutely archaic, antediluvian ways of working, so that simply having the kind of woo effect of having a tiny little bit of proportional representation in one part of the Scottish elections propels us right to the top of the chronic British pecking order when we are laughably off the money in terms of how any modern European democracy would work. So I'm sorry, I cannot actually get particularly exercised about how to micromanage a system which will keep throwing up faults like this, which will keep distracting people's attention. Yes, it's irritating to see somebody effectively kind of rejected by the electorate in their own named capacity, only to pop up on the list. But, if people started to have a proper discussion about the way democracy works, it may not sound very palatable, but a lot of countries operate party lists.
Well, that was me tell, wasn't it? Thank you, Lesley. And actually thinking about it, talking of party lists, that's exactly how we chose our candidates for the European Parliament, wasn't it? You pick a party and you get who's in that group. So, fair point. Let's see how I got on with my second question.
All of the Clacks Manager Women for India are big fans of you, Lesley, that you're regularly mentioned in their Clacks WFI podcast and occasionally featured in clips from rallies. And their question is, have you ever listened to their podcast? And if so, could you give us some feedback? If not, could you just say hello to them, to the Clacks WFIs, especially to Uber fangirl Teleri, who had her photo taken with you when you were on stage at Inverness. But sadly, she was wearing a Helga hat. I don't know what that is. It must be a Viking thing. Yeah. And she managed to obscure Lesley with one of her own horns. So sounds a bit painful.
Sounds like a hell of a photo, that one. But
yeah.
Right, I'm sorry I haven't listened to the Clacks WFIs podcast, but I will go and search it out now and put some feedback back online. So yeah.
Phew, got away with the second one. Thanks, Lesley. We would love to have any feedback you've got on our podcast. Would be very welcome. Thank you very much. On the topic of podcasts, there's a lot of them around. There's a lot of very good independence-related podcasts around. And one of the beauties of podcasting is that people like us can just set yourselves up. Costs nothing to download the Audacity software. Obviously, lockdown makes things different, but what we tended to do, as you know, if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, is whenever we're out and about at events or rallies or activities, we're just recording what's happening or how we're feeling about it or flavour of the atmosphere or whatever it is. Most of the time we're just recording on our phones. Due to lockdown, we've obviously been trying to do a bit more Zoom-based. Quality isn't quite the same in sound terms, but it's the best that we can do and it's not bad at all. What I thought I would do is just share some of those podcasts because it's always good to have something new to try. But also, on our own, we may not have huge numbers of followers compared to the big professional mainstream media productions, but collectively, there might be quite a lot of people are tuning into some of these, and if we can share that audience around, results in more people getting involved in the conversation and information getting shared more widely, and that's part of what the grassroots is all about. It's joining up, becoming greater than the sum of the parts. So here are some of my favourite podcasts, and would love to hear from anybody if there are any others that you know of. You can tweet us on @ClacksWFI, or you can drop us a comment on our Facebook page, Clacks Manager Women for Independence, or you can get in touch through our hub page, which is plus Clacks WFI, or Indie Live Radio through the Discord chat room or their Facebook. Or send us a voice clip and we can feature you in the show as well. That would be great. So one of the beauties of the grassroots media is just how many different places it flourishes. So we've got live streaming, we've got online radio, there's broadcasting, YouTube, Facebook, podcasts, blogs, newspapers, books, films, documentaries. Indie Live Radio has a lot of podcasts in its schedule, and we save those to a Podbean channel called yescowl.podbean.com, which is a really good channel. It's got lots of different podcasts on it, so you can get a variety of presenters and different topics. And the Podbean app is also very good. If you download that onto your phone, it pings whenever there's a new one out. And what we're trying to do is make better use of that resource, because I know a lot of people, myself included, consume our radio on demand. You can't always listen through the day. What we're trying to do is put more of the shows onto the podcast channels. If you like the sound of any of these podcasts, I would recommend give them a try. And if you like them, share them. That's the other thing with all the podcast channels. It's got facility to put comments. You can like, you can share. Again, the hub, very good for whenever a new podcast goes onto our podcast channel. It's also shared through the hub. So what have we got on Yes Cow Podbean? Well, at the moment, we have this podcast, we have the poetry bit of the Sunday Jazz and Poetry Show, and we have Indie Pram, Ray, who has got some great interviews with, again, a very interesting selection of guests. And because of the lockdown, obviously, he's been a bit more curtailed in that. The last few weeks, he's been converting the Business for Scotland booklet, which is all the facts and figures about the Scottish economy in Scotland, the Brief it's called. He's been converting that into a series of podcasts. So again, they're very useful. And there's also been a great little series which is called Radical Scottish History Podcast, and it's by Stuart McHardy. And this is a fascinating look back at some of the things you think you know about Scottish history. Many of us went to schools where it just wasn't taught at all, or it was a UK sanitised version. What I like about Stuart's podcast, this is obviously his subject area, and he suggests different ways that things might have happened or different interpretations based on source documents at the time. It's that kind of meticulous look at, well, what are the facts actually telling us, and might it be interpreted a different way other than through the eyes of the British state, which I think is really fascinating. So definitely recommend that one. As well as our podcast channel, there's Lesley Riddoch, of course. Her podcast tends to come out on a Tuesday, and it's her and Paddy Joyce generally just chatting about whatever has happened in the previous couple of days. And we always love listening to Lesley's podcast. Very interesting, very informative, and very topical, and always. Another one I've come across recently, but is becoming compulsive listening for me, it's the I Write Radio. Now, I believe they have a video cast as well, but they do a podcast version of it, and it's daily, this show. And there are 3 blokes called Stuart, Norrie and Jimmy who get together and discuss what's happened in the news today, what's happened at Holyrood or the daily press conferences, and sometimes they have a bit of an argument about what's happened, have a bit of a go at each other. One day this week there was only 2 of them turned up because one of them seemed to have gone off in the huff, but they've got a lot of grumpy old man personality about them, and I am finding it a very easy way to catch up on what's happened through the day and things that I've not managed to catch. Bedtime listening at the moment. The Wee Ginger Doug cast is another one I used to enjoy hugely, but it doesn't seem to be back on the air yet. That, of course, is Wee Ginger Doug's podcast for The National. And The National itself used to do a regular politics podcast, which, again, very, very interesting, very informative, but they don't seem to be doing that either at the moment. So I think those are perhaps casualties of lockdown. Other one that I always like listening to is the Commonweal Policy podcast, and that is Dr. Craig DL, who's got just so much knowledge about such a wide range of things. Generally weekly it comes out. We often feature that on Indie Live Radio as well, but you can get it on you can get it through the Commonweal website. There's another long-running podcast which is called the Scottish Independence Podcast, and this is by Michael Greenwell. And back when I was first getting interested in independence activism, and it was after the 2014 vote, that was the first podcast I came across, and some of the speakers that Michael captures and some of the subject matter is fascinating. It's almost a historical record of how the movement has developed. The other one that I like is the Alex Salmond Show, the podcast version of his show. It seems to translate very well because it's a discussion-based show. He's another one who has really interesting guests and people who you wouldn't normally see on our mainstream media, and he'll draw politicians from other countries and Ireland often, and he seems to manage to get a lot of MPs from different parties to chip in, have conversations. And when you think what Alex Salmond has, the turmoil that he has been through in his personal life, the fact that he has never missed a show, he's still bang on topical with the subjects that he covers, and you wouldn't know to watch it that there was anything amiss. He's a very professional presenter. The Scottish Government also do a podcast. Now, this tends to be just a repeat of First Minister's questions, typically. If you miss FMQs, that's a really convenient way of catching up on it. Another one that I've been listening to for a while, although intermittently actually, because I forget about it, because I don't think he publicises this as well as he could, but it's Barhead Boy, whose podcast is Through a Scottish Prism. He, I believe, lives in Spain. So he's had quite an interesting perspective on a lot of Scottish issues. But he's a diehard independent supporter, and his opinions and his thoughts on what's going can be very entertaining and very strident, I think. Another one I've just found recently, and I've only heard a couple of, and it doesn't seem to come out that often, maybe monthly or every 3 weeks or so, is the Angry Scotland podcast. Now, the presenters are listed as being Chris, Tucker and Free, so I don't know if those are their real names or if that is a pseudonym. But again, discussion by 3 well-informed and very opinionated hosts. Sometimes a bit sweary, that one is the only thing I would say. In fact, sometimes very sweary. Now, the last 3 I'm going to mention I haven't listened to yet. They are on my list. They've been recommended to me by people. One is called Beyond the Noise, which is David James, who again I think is Commonweal. One is Not Another Fake News Cast, which is presented by Paul and Jerry, and I'm not sure what their take on things are, but I'm looking forward to finding out. And the third one is A Broken World podcast, which is Grant Parker. That's another one that's on Indie Live Radio, although I haven't seen it on our podcast channel, so that's something else we can look to include. And finally, mustn't forget, Marlene, one of the other presenters on Indie Live Radio, has been doing her own podcast called The Corona Diaries, which is about her experience of the lockdown from her perspective. You can get a link to that, by the way, from the Indie Live website. So there you go, that's quite a few, quite a range of different styles, quite a range of different presenters. And the one thing that I love is that these are people who passionately care about politics and events and society and culture and history in Scotland. This is the bit that's missing from mainstream media, is this perspective of people who don't think through the eyes of the Union. They think through the eyes of Scotland, and it is so refreshing to listen to them. They're often very informative, very entertaining, and freely available. So why not give them a try and let me know what you think, and let me know if there's any others that you've come across, because I'd love to hear about them. Now let's join Clacks WFIs in the virtual coffee shop. Hi Anne!
Sorry I'm late.
Broadcasting Scotland managed to get another question on the First Minister's briefing yesterday. What would you like asked?
How do you feel when journalists ask the same question over and over again?
And did you see Janie Godley's voiceover? It was on exactly that. Yeah. But seriously though,
I think there's so many things you could say, but you know the thing that gets me at the moment is all this, oh, she's just saying that we're not coming out of lockdown to be different from Boris, to show that Scotland's different and all this kind of stuff, and it's still the political point scoring that's going on. There's still political point scoring from the other parties. At every opportunity they are political point scoring, despite the fact that there's lots of certainly anecdotal evidence of people coming round going, aren't we lucky we're in Scotland because it's been handled so much better here. I mean, Neil was up at, he looks after, and they are shielding, and they are delighted with the way they have been managed. And the husband who's got cancer got an eye infection, and they actually managed to get a diagnosis online. The optician called up, spoke to the wife, said, right, I want you to do this with your phone and your camera and do that, so he could actually see her husband's eyes and then give his diagnosis and give medication for it. So they've kind of almost like flipped 180 from being what they said to Neil last year. Well, I mean, there was nobody other than Boris to vote for, was there? To come in the other way round now.
I think the next couple of weeks are going to be probably the most significant couple of weeks for the future of the UK, seriously, because if they do open up down south, what's going to happen is they are going to get a huge increase in deaths, and it's going to be fairly obvious that that's where it's coming from. I think it's terrifying.
I'm finding that a few people have commentated on the mixed messages. So one message coming out through the papers, and then another message coming out from Westminster to deliberately obfuscate what's the actual picture and confuse the general public as to what's actually the plan. And then to add us making decisions about whether we want to be part of those plans or whether it's better for our civilians to be out on a different plan, that muddies the waters even more. And I'm not saying that isn't right to have those discussions. I think it absolutely is, but I think it's interesting the way that Westminster are trying to really muddy the waters.
Putting things out there to see how people react to it, and then they're going to, because they've not made any announcement yet, they're putting it out there to see the response before they go, yeah, this is what we're doing.
That's classic Dom Cummings, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
because he does that.
Why, what's Jack come out with?
This thing about Number 10 saying, yeah, we understand that maybe there needs to be differences across the four nations, and we understand that. And Alistair Jack saying, no, we must be in absolute lockstep, even if everybody dies.
Yeah. But then my concern is, like Anne says, if it changes down south and they open up, people are going to start kind of flocking up here. That's my fear, and it's like, I want to go down and just block the border and go, no. And even the same within Scotland, if people from Glasgow think they can go up to the Highlands, no, stay where you are.
They just don't get it. That my only anxiety is this: too much unknowns. We don't know who's got it. We do not know the numbers. Has anybody done any thinking about these excess deaths that they're talking about now? Where do we thinking? So it's being framed as if the excess deaths are people that aren't seeking medical help, but I do not believe that, because most of the things, most of the things that you go to the GP for, you are not going to keel over in a week or two. I really think these excess deaths are COVID related by and large, and I think a lot of them are in care homes, and I think a lot of them are in people being looked after at home because of the complete lack of proper infection control, unfortunately, from the carers and the irresponsibility of some of these home managers. And they're all trying to deflect it on the Scottish government. I'm horrified.
There was a super article in today's FT pointing out that the care home that's in Skye, there's also one in Clacks, I believe, as well, that they own.
I was saying, was that the one that said they'd paid out 4 million in dividends? 5 million?
Yeah.
How much PPE could you have bought with that?
No, absolutely. And they've also had grants from the government as well.
It also makes a complete mockery about paying for care. Because you're not paying for care, you're paying for shareholders.
Yes, that's right.
That was, they're there on the website. Due to the difficulty, we are using highly skilled care assistants instead of nurses. They're still doing that, and they've got that on their website. When is someone going to pick up on that and going, what the hell? You cannot provide proper care without qualified staff there.
Have a look on that article, Anne, because they've also pointed out that they have never made a profit. They've had 1 year of profit. When you see figures like that, you sit there going, why are we subsidising this?
When I was working in Gloucestershire, and mine was unusual in kind of having social care and NHS working together at that particular part of England, but they were trying to get Band 4 nurses to start doing Band 5 actual registered nurse tasks under the aegis of training towards being a Band 5 through university modules. And this has been in the works for a while, a very slow mechanism. And even when they started rolling it out, there were massive, massive flaws in it because they just hadn't understood the clinical side of what needs to happen. And then before we knew it, they were saying, well, we've learned our lessons, we're now looking at therapies. We're going to get therapies to do that, so that without even properly liaising with the universities about what courses would offer and how that would all work. So then what we ended up with a gaggle of people apparently being able to be signed off on certain tasks and dealing with very human situations. You know, if you are in a situation where somebody is hyperventilating or having an epileptic attack at a particular point, then, you know, that's the responsibility that if you haven't been trained for, then things will tend to go wrong. So
the health services in England are just a whole group of private companies, basically. It's privatised, and so is the education system with these academies. To all extent, there is really no proper public service in England anymore.
I think as well, one of the things with it, like the privatisation, as soon as they outsource, they immediately add in a layer of people who are wanting to make profit from that. Whereas if it's all within the NHS, there shouldn't be any profit. Nobody's looking for a profit out of that. They're looking to provide services. And as soon as you go, well, that service is being outsourced, so we used to pay £10 an hour for the domestic services, but we've outsourced it with the money that we paid for that to another company, and they're taking a whole chunk of that off for profit. So there's only £8 an hour for those domestic services. So the quality of service goes down. And also in the NHS, any lessons that are learned, first of all, they've got to admit that they've made mistakes, and they don't like doing that. And then they have to learn from them, and the adoption rate of learning from them is really, really slow.
If you look up Healthcare Improvement Scotland, they're the special health board that does all the evidence-based for best practice for every board in Scotland. We're the ones that do all the inspections in the hospitals. There's things like Scottish Medicines Consortium that deals with all the drugs. So if you hear in the papers, you know, oh, my child hasn't got this drug, it's because the Scottish Medical Consortium said it's no value for money.
Interesting.
So they're the overarching bit that does the whole quality assurance thing for NHS Scotland.
Thank you for that.
Well, what's been going on with you, Anne? We've not seen you for ages. What's
Me, I've been at work. I've never been so busy in my entire life. It's unbelievable how busy we are.
And are you managing to work from home?
Working from home, yeah. So we're working from home, we're constantly on Teams. I have a deadline for Monday, so the person that I'm waiting for in this other meeting, getting a whole load of work ready for a deadline on Monday, and then it's on to the next thing in the pile. So yeah, busy. Wow. Really busy.
So questions for First Minister, because mine would be on if we have to take the choice that England and Wales and Northern Ireland to a degree are following a different path, and it's not one that's in the interest of folk living in Scotland, then what measures are going to be taken?
Like, how are you going to shut the border from people coming up?
Would you like us to come down and form a human chain, albeit 2 metres apart? Because I think we would do that, wouldn't we?
But they did it in Wales. They stopped people heading off on holiday at kind of Easter time. They had police on the kind of main roads about turning people and going, no, back home.
But the police are not turning around. I mean, let's not forget that particular Tory donor that moved 500 miles north to go to his country estate. Police didn't do anything with that person, did they?
I've got a feeling that he donated some money or some...
I have to say, my little interjection here is that one of the leaks through the press is that a Scottish senior police officer has said that basically if the lockdown goes in different directions, then Scottish police will be obliged to turn away visitors at the border. This comes via the Daily Record. No senior police officer's name is given, but it's part of this war of sort of testing and probing that's going on to see between the governments and to see what people's reactions is to all this before they actually make big decisions. It's all pushing out the propaganda first.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what Arlene's come out with, seeing she's turned around and said we'll extend for 3 weeks as well.
So it could be all three of the devolved have the same line, and it's only Johnson that's out of line.
Arlene's message was confused because in one message she said a week minimum, and then another week she was quoted as saying it'll be at least 3 weeks.
No, it's this morning that I heard it as being 3 weeks as well, which I was surprised.
Both messages I had were yesterday.
I think the thing that's really outrageous, though, and it's been publicised everywhere, is that Johnson is preparing to make statements on Sunday that neither Parliament have any sight of, and none of the devolved governments have been involved in at all. So, in terms of...
If you go to Civil Service World, they've published leaks as well, which they quote as coming from other places, but it's fairly consistent with all the drivel that you've seen in the Mail and the Sun and all that.
We were watching the Phantom Power Estonia
excellent,
last
isn't
night.
it? Yeah.
So there's one guy who's living in Scotland, but he is an ambassador with Estonia, and I think they intimated that the other half of his family is from Estonia, and they were talking about changes and particularly things like medical transfer of information and people being able to communicate with their doctors, for example. And he said, well, it's been digitalized for so long that it's not actually felt like a big change because you don't necessarily have to go to your doctor. It's a bit like you said earlier, Lynn, about people being able to contact their GP with information and maybe do it over Skype instead.
Yeah.
That seems to be such a norm in Estonia that actually all that infrastructure is already there. But also in terms of data, in terms of the medical data, when he was being asked about people's actual comfort with that amount of personal data being somewhere, and he said it's a mix of that trust for the government, but more trust for the systems.
Yeah,
So
that's what I picked up on. It was a level of trust that they have, and that they're a highly technological country anyway. So as you say, this wasn't new for them. But the thing that struck me most was the level of trust in their governance, and that's why they're not as reticent. I'm not even reticent about this government app. I'm just not doing it. End of. The app I'm happy with, the wee kind of COVID-19 one, which is King's College London. That's a research one. I'm not concerned about that. But the government one, the one that they're putting out, I mean, they've not gone through the UK government, Westminster. They've not gone through the Information Commission Office and looked at they've not been asked to say, we're happy with the level of security you've put on this data. There's so many questions about it. And I think is Matt Hancock's not got links to where all this data's going.
GCHQ have got full access to the data from a fortnight ago, at least.
Just thinking about the settled status stuff, when Murray was getting a settled status, all that information, when it was being uploaded, it said, the government can sell this anywhere in the world. You go, what?
Then GCHQ now have full access to NHS data under the Coronavirus Act because the app has to be deemed to be secure in terms of the security of the state, as it were. So they now have their fingers in it as well.
I'm just going to start making it up then.
Changing the subject, but relevant. Did anybody notice in the Nicola Sturgeon's briefing yesterday the announcement that people that are not online at the moment, especially mostly elderly, they're going to get iPads and devices and a techie backup to get them online? I couldn't even find any links to that. I was trying to post it up. I thought, this is brilliant, Still such a lot of people that are just not connected and not being able to participate at the moment.
That could be handy for digital voting, couldn't it? Because they were talking about would they be able to do elections. And I'd rather see that than postal voting.
Yeah, I would agree, totally.
It's moving us towards that digital society that Estonia, again in that film, have proved works so well.
I went out cycling yesterday. This is my mask I had on.
Oh my.
So after a while you forget you're wearing it. I'm smiling at people and saying hello and stuff like that.
It reminds me of Pob.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I thought that was Michael Gove, Pob, isn't it?
Just felt a line creep down my back when you said that name.
I know, he's been suspiciously quiet recently, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I think they're lining up a lot of the others, like Matt Hancock for sure, possibly Rab and all the scientists to be the fall guys when it all goes wrong.
Slithering away in the
Yeah.
background.
Where's Rees Mogg been?
Well, that's a good
Did
question.
anyone ever hear the other day?
Or the Home Secretary.
I'll tell you where he's been buying very lucrative investments in South America at a time when the economies there are collapsing. So he's been hedging his hedge funds and spending lots of money there on things which are
Where did you find that?
The Financial Times.
Right, okay.
On his unethical investments in South America. It relates to the food industry a lot of it. So a lot of these people are being forced to work in conditions in the food factories, not the infrastructure, which are extremely controversial to say the least, and he's getting his nose stuck right into that lot.
Did you see Keir Starmer's thing? He was quoted in the Express, which of course I'm not going to click on, but said that he's going to win back Scotland and he's going to do it by spending more time in Scotland. They go, well, here we go again. They think the only reason that we don't vote Labour in Scotland is because there aren't enough Labour politicians coming up from London.
But it was all about crushing the SNP as
That's
well.
right, yes, crushing Sturgeon as well.
Convenient that Alistair Darling was on BBC Radio 4, Gordon Brown was on the BBC, and Keir Starmer's trying to make a sort of a re-entry at the same time. It's just all of a sudden it's just a little swing back to the red toad.
But he still doesn't understand Scotland any better than any of his predecessors.
I've just read an article that's come up in the Scotsman that Jean Freeman had stated that they cannot get PPE from abroad because of the comment made by British government.
Yeah.
Anyone else seen that one?
Yeah.
What's the comment? What was the comment?
I'm basically saying the overseas network to get PPE has been headed from Westminster.
Yeah. So basically, Westminster is trying to take control of all PPE coming into the UK, although they'll deny that. But it's been evident that even nursing homes down south are getting their PPE pirated. So
I saw
it's definitely happening. And Jean Freeman has asked Matt Hancock to comment on that days ago, and he's still not responded to it.
Adam Price tweeted about that. I know the Plaid Cymru leader. He tweeted about that, saying it has now been confirmed that Westminster stole the PPE. That was the word you used, stole the PPE that was earmarked for Wales.
Yeah, you're talking about PPE that's been paid for in advance by private owners of nursing homes. They get shipped in, it's being paid for, and then the UK government gets all it's exactly the same out the Trumpian playbook.
So it's basically robbery.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a different mood this week with the nursing home. It's a bit more sombre this week.
Was that the one in Tullibody?
Yeah, it's just kind of starting to hit really close to home, eh? Well, there's been 2 deaths and 4 or 5 tested positive. Pretty bad.
Our neighbour across the road, her mum's in the orchard.
Right. So she taken she's worried sick.
Yeah, I think everybody is.
I just felt with the conflicting information coming from Westminster and the Scottish Government, I just felt that people should be aware that it is on their doorstep, and for God's sake, they still have to be careful.
Oh yeah,
so
they were talking about having picnics and where we
I saw a good post that said, some people are obviously prepared to accept a certain percentage of the population are going to die. So they said, what we would like you to do, if you're happy with that, then could you pick 1 or 2 members for your family and say you're happy for them to die? So you're doing to other families. You're saying, I'm happy for members of your family to die.
Exactly.
There is a lot of NHS staff actually going into the care homes now, and that gives me a bit of a sense that things will be done properly.
So that's it for this week. As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to check out the Indie Live Radio's podcast channel on yescowl.podbean.com, and we'll catch you all later. Bye now.
Ending like